I counted seconds on a watch I repaired, while he counted on me not noticing. When the second hand skipped, I finally saw how much time he had been stealing. By then, our wedding fund wasn't a gift. It was his leash. The month I turned 31, Asheville finally stopped smelling like late spring rain and started smelling like hot pine. I kept the windows of my apartment cracked anyway, fan humming, magnifying loupe clipped to my glasses while I coaxed a 60-year-old ETA movement back to life. On my workbench lay a neat line of screws, like a row of punctuation marks, each one a promise that if I did this right, the second hand would finally sweep instead of stutter. I liked watch repair because it was honest. The balance wheel doesn't gaslight you, and a mainspring never says one thing and does another. It either holds tension or it doesn't. By day, I'm an associate urban planner for Buncombe County, traffic calming, rezoning requests, tedious public comment nights where someone inevitably accuses a tree of being a conspiracy. My favorite part is designing pocket parks. I'm proudest of a project at 12 Biltmore Avenue that turned an ugly gravel lot into a shaded square with 2 long benches and a water fountain kids treat like a secret. My hobby is restoring mechanical watches, American and European. Anything with a story and a balanced staff. It's patient work, brave in its smallness. Every hour I spend hunched over a movement is an hour my mind remembers how to be quiet. When I met Daniel, he seemed like the human opposite of quiet in all the best ways. He was 34, tall, soft-cheeked, under a perfectly trimmed beard. Half German, his father from Bremen, his mother from Ohio. With a last name, Kruger, he said the right way on the first date, the R singing, the UA smile. He worked in enterprise sales for a Boston-based SaaS company called Onsetly. He covered the Southeast, lived on flights, and had a calendar that looked like a Tetris board. He messaged first. I answered because he'd made a joke about zoning overlays that was correctly specific. He came to my public workshop, watched me replace a cracked jewel on a battered Tissot with a patience I mistook for respect. He liked to say he was shameless about asking for the upgrade, on flights, at restaurants, at the car rental counter. The first red flag buried inside the charm that I only found once I looked. He didn't ask. He demanded casually, as if the world owed him an aisle seat because he could say status match with the right tone. He moved into my place in December. He said my apartment looked like a film set exposed brick, a shelf of small screwdrivers like silver pencils. He put his garmentry suits beside my thrifted cardigans and installed a tray for his watches next to my bench. He owned a Tag Heuer he never wound. We got engaged on March 8, 2025, after a drive on the Blue Ridge Parkway when the rhododendrons were just thinking about blooming. His proposal was exactly the kind you could post. A wool blanket, a small picnic basket, a ring that wasn't modest. He'd chosen the Montford rooftop bar for dinner. The server brought champagne, and the ring box appeared like it had always been part of the table. I said yes because I loved him, because he made me feel wanted in a way I conflated with being seen. We opened a wedding fund 2 days later at Blue Ridge Community Bank. We'll both contribute evenly, he said. Clean, fair, no awkwardness. I transferred $10,000 money I'd saved from a modest inheritance and from selling 2 restored Omegas and set up an auto transfer of $800 on the first of every month. He put in $12,000 from what he called a beast quarter. We agreed we wouldn't touch it for anything but deposits for the venue and vendors. Let me manage the account, he offered, signing up for the online access. Work's got me reviewing contracts every day. You hate dashboards. That was true, but also I had never hated a dashboard in my life. I liked reading terms. It was my secret love language. Still, I nodded. Meetings, case studies, demos. He'd said he could handle one more login. Subtle became loud in little ways. The way he'd hold my phone and not hand it back when I reached. Just a second, babe. The way his notifications showed only from Onsetly Marketing, even when the preview flashed a name. The way he'd use we to describe decisions where only his mouth moved. He wanted me to quit my hobby for the months leading to the wedding because you'll be too stressed to focus on screws. I laughed like he'd made a joke he had meant to be kindness, but he wasn't smiling. Just until after, he said, thumb pressed into the muscle in my shoulder like he was massaging compliance. I found my second red flag on a Tuesday night in April around 10:40 p.m., when he sent a photo of his work dinner in Charlotte, a grainy, dark shot of a bottle of wine and a shadow that could have been anyone. The Airbnb address he'd sent earlier was in Nodar, his receipt that synced to our shared budgeting app, his choice for transparency, showed a charge at Luminosa on 601 Collins Avenue in Miami Beach. I read it twice, felt the second hand in my chest skip. When he came home, I asked. He laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Oh, that's a weird corporate thing. The card runs through a hub. The billing address is... Look, it's boring." He hugged me like he'd settled a minor confusion for a child. The billing address on the receipt wasn't an address. It was a geotag. When he pulled away, my nose was full of his cologne and something sweet I didn't own. On May 17th, at 1:13 p.m., 2 months before the date we'd picked to sign a contract with the Foundry Hotel, downtown Asheville, black steel beams and a courtyard where Ivy made good promises, my bank sent an alert. Transfer of $5,500 from wedding fund to Onsetly Corporate, not wire, ACH. That afternoon, I struck the balance wheel on a Hamilton and felt my hand tremble. When I asked, he called it a deposit for a group rate. "We'll get a discount," he said. "It's complicated. They invoice me through work." I asked him to show me the email chain. He kissed my wrist and called me sweet girl and told me he'd forward it. The forward never arrived. I stopped trusting what he said the same day I stopped trusting the annoying little skip in the second hand of the ETA 1080 I was working on. A skip means a burr you missed in the escapement or a pallet fork that's not quite aligned. Lies have the same sound if you listen. Small catches, regular as breathing, that tell you something is off. He traveled more. Late May, he was in Atlanta with Nate, then Miami for a client summit, then Raleigh. His hair smelled like the citrus hotel shampoos he collected. His phone was face down more often. Sometimes he'd take calls in the hallway, then move into the bedroom and close the door. I wasn't paranoid, I was planning. I started a folder on my laptop labeled Calthorpe Pocket Park Budget Q4, a name boring enough to be safe. In it I dragged screenshots, the transfer notice, the Luminosa receipt, 2 Venmo payments to a profile named EJ Sunrise with a sun emoji 112 with the note Uber on April 4th at 11:58 p.m. and 60 on April 12th with a palm tree. I cross-referenced calendar invites and flight confirmations forwarded to our shared email. He'd flown CLTMIA on April 4th, returning April 6th. He had claimed Atlanta. The flights were booked under a private email I had never seen before. dcaruga, consultingfastmail.com. I did not confront. I am not a plate-smashing person. Instead, I turned my watchmaker's lens outward. You don't yell at a movement to fix it. You find the tooth that's out of true and you adjust. On June 15th, at our engagement party at 25 Page Avenue, a private room at Posana, overlooking the storefronts that still hang bunting all summer, Daniel decided to be charming at my expense where everyone could see. My mother had flown in from Milwaukee. My best friend from grad school, Lucia Delgado from Lisbon, had come with a bottle of Vinho Verde and jokes. Daniel gave a toast about our differences, the way I color-code spices, the way I hoard tiny screws like dragon treasure, how I take apart old things to make them new again. And then he grinned wide, how Maya is lucky enough not to have to worry about money because I've got that covered. Laughter. People clapped. He added, "She's the heart. I'm the infrastructure. She makes parks. I make deals. Nobody better touch that wedding fund or my lawyers will have a panic attack." My mother's lips tightened the way they do when she finds a hair in soup. Lucia's eyes flicked to mine. Mine were steady. I sipped sparkling water and remembered every word. I said nothing, and that was the last time he mistook my quiet for surrender. At 7:42 the next morning, June 16th, I walked into Blue Ridge Community Bank, 45 Patton Avenue, and asked to speak to a branch manager. A woman named Joan in a navy blazer brought me to her office. I placed on the desk a folder with a notarized letter revoking Daniel's sole online access rights and adding mine, a copy of the account agreement section 9B, about joint signatories highlighted, and a printout of the 5,500 transfer with the memo on Setley. I asked for a full ledger of all debits and credits since March 10th. Joan said, "Do you want some water?" Because I was too calm. The ledger showed 3 transfers to entities that were not vendors. 5,500 to On-Setley Corporate ACH, 2,000 to Kruger Consult LLC, and 1,250 to Sunrise Creative. The last had a memo, photography hold. A deposit was a refund from Eden House, 136 Collins Ave, Miami Beach, 318. I emailed a North Carolina family lawyer named Patrice Allen at 9:21 a.m. and titled it Premarital Joint Funds Misappropriation Pre-Engagement Disclosures. I attached what I had and scheduled a consult for June 18th at 3:30 p.m. at her office at 235 College Street, Suite 402. I called the Foundry Hotel and asked to put a tentative hold on October 12th for a corporate luncheon. I put down a $500 personal deposit using my card. The events manager, a kind woman named Stephanie, said I'd need to provide guest count by August 1st. I then opened a new account at a credit union, Lucia used Self-Help Credit Union on Broadway, and moved my paycheck direct deposit. When Daniel came home that night, he was jovial. He waved a Boston Red Sox cap he didn't own yesterday and kissed me like a man who needed to wipe something away. I made a spicy peanut noodle dish, asked about his day, listened to a story about pipeline and Q3 forecast, then excused myself to call my mother. In the bedroom, I photographed the side of his face in the soft light of 8:40 p.m. when his phone lit up on the couch. "EJ, can you talk?" He flipped it over and stretched. I said I'd be up late, finishing a design memo, and he should go to bed without me. The lawyer, Patrice, was all steel and clean lines. She wore a white blouse without a wrinkle and spoke like she expected people to do what she said. "You're not married yet," she said, after scanning my folder, which I had relabeled Riverfront Traffic Study Draft 2. "This is a civil matter of breach of agreement, not divorce. But the behavior you're describing may intersect with fraud. We can send a demand letter to the bank to freeze withdrawals pending an internal review if we demonstrate a pattern. Also, do not inform him you have counsel. Change your locks. Put your watches somewhere else." "Where?" I asked. She smiled. "If it were me, a safe at a facility with no emotional footprint. There's a place on Hendersonville Road you'll like. Asheville Secure Vault, 3214 Hendersonville Odd." That afternoon, I carried a Pelican case in an Uber and tried not to listen to the driver talk about how tourists ruin everything. I rented a medium safe deposit box. Into it I placed my grandmother's Omega, the 2 restored Tissots, the ETA 1080 still in pieces in labeled paper trays, and 3 notebook journals full of small drawings of gears and bench notes, and 2 letters from my father I only read on bad days. I left the Tag Heuer on Daniel's tray where he'd always left it, unwound. On June 19th at 6:13 a.m., Daniel shook my shoulder. "I'm heading to Charlotte. Client breakfast at 9. "You're staying in Noda?" I asked. He squinted like he was deciding if I was picking a fight. "Yeah. Airbnb," he said. "You know, the cute one." He kissed my forehead. "You have to relax, sweetheart. You overthink." He left, trailing the smell of cedar and something floral that wasn't ours. At 10:04 a.m., I forwarded to Patrice the confirmation email of his flight CLTMIA at 11:25 a.m. Flight OS4462, a code share. I had access to nothing and everything. The shared email auto-sorts receipts. He'd bought it at 5:51 a.m. from his Fastmail address. The receipt forwarded to his Gmail. He had not unsubscribed family from his old forward rule life. At 12:50 p.m., I visited HR at the county building and told my manager, Patrick, a sanitized version. "I'm in a difficult situation and I may need to leave early some days. There may be a person who shows up." He nodded and said he'd inform security and discreetly circulate my photo of Daniel to the front desk, with a note, "Not authorized to access CityWorks floors." The guard, Tasha, wrote down the make and plate of Daniel's car, gray Audi A4, North Carolina plate, JPL 3721. At 6:23 p.m., Daniel texted that dinner ran late. At 7:01 p.m., Lucia sent me a screenshot of an Instagram story from EJ. Sunrise public showing a wine glass raised at a restaurant table under a ceiling of plants. The caption read, "Here, now." 2 men's wrists were visible. One wore a Tag Heuer. The reflection in the glass, if you rotated and zoomed and turned brightness up, showed Miami neon in reverse letters. I saved it to the folder with the boring name. June 21st was the breaking point. He came back on the 6:55 p.m. flight, called from the car that he was exhausted and starving, and asked me to order Thai from Little B on Merriman. I did. When he walked in at 8:17 p.m., I was at my bench. The ETA 1080's second hand moved smoothly under a new jewel. He kissed my neck and said, "I wish you'd do your hair for me when I get back." I turned off my lamp and faced him. "We need to revisit the wedding fund," I said, voice level. "I want all access privileges restored to joint online access. I will not be contributing further until we reconcile the 3 transfers you made in April and May." He blinked, then smirked like a man remembering a canned line. "Maya, if you're going to start us off with accusations—" "Daniel," I said, still calm, "I spoke to the bank. Section 9B is clear. We are co-owners. You do not have unilateral withdrawal rights for non-vendor transfers. If you had a valid business reason, produce the contract and the authorizing emails." He spun the Red Sox cap on his finger. "I didn't steal from you." "I know," I said. "You stole from us." The quiet in our small living room had weight. He moved his jaw. Eventually he said, "I'll straighten it out tomorrow," and walked to the bathroom. His phone, face down, buzzed on the counter. He picked it up. I watched him type a long message. He glanced up to see if I was watching. I wasn't. Or rather, I was, but through the lens that focuses on gears. He didn't straighten anything out. On June 24th at 9:08 a.m. Patrice sent a demand to the bank and a preservation of evidence letter to Onsetley's legal department, CCing a generic ethics address. She was careful in the language. Alleged misapplication of jointly held funds to personal or corporate purposes. Demand for internal hold and records retention. Request for clarification on use of non-corporate entity accounts for purported vendor deposits. She asked for a freeze of the wedding fund pending review. Joan from Blue Ridge called me at 3:16 p.m. and said they'd put a precautionary hold for 72 hours while they reviewed documentation. Daniel's response was not to provide documentation, but to start a performance. He sent flowers to my office white lilies that smelled like a funeral and a note that read, "Let's not be enemies, D." He texted at midnight and 2 a.m., messages that slid between pet names and legal threats. He showed up at my building at 7:30 a.m. on June 25th and waited in his Audi with the engine running. Tasha from security called me at 7:45 when she saw him pulling into the county garage, the laminated visitor pass from our last staff party dangling from his rearview mirror. He insisted to Tasha that he was dropping off lunch for his fiancé. She intercepted him downstairs. When he tried to step into the elevator, she said, "Nope," with a finality I wanted to frame. I documented everything. I wrote in my notebook the dates and times, the tone, the content. I recorded the voicemail where he said, "You're making a mountain out of a molehill. And anyway, people in my position use liquidity all the time." I wrote the police report number for the non-emergency call I made on June 26th when he stood across the street for 40 minutes with his hands in his pockets, looking up at my windows. CPD 2025 33784. The officer who came, a woman named Simmons, said, "If he's your fiancé, this is complicated." I said, "It's not." She wrote down his plate number. On June 27th, Joan at the bank called, "We have recorded an internal finding that 3 withdrawals were not authorized in accordance with Section 9B. We will be reversing the ACH to the extent possible." That afternoon, the wedding fund credited $3,750 back from Sunrise Creative and $1,250 from Kruger Consult LLC. Onsetley, through their counsel, sent Patrice a letter on June 28th. "Mr. Kruger is not authorized to receive or transmit funds on behalf of Onsetley to non-Onsetley accounts. The ACH logs you provided do not match any corporate-approved transactions." They attached a note, a reminder email from May 22nd to all sales reps. Use only corporate expense platforms. Private accounts prohibited. Violation leads to disciplinary action. The letter ended with the icily neutral line, "We are investigating." Patrice forwarded it to me with one line. He is now interesting to his employer. The night of June 29th, Daniel stood outside my apartment door and shifted to pleading. He spoke through the wood as if to a skittish pet. "Maya, I love you. I messed up the process. I moved money, I admit that. I was smoothing cash flow and I was going to put it back. I wrote a check today. We don't have to involve lawyers." He slid an envelope under the door. I did not pick it up. At 9:11 p.m., I heard an elevator ding, a neighbor's laugh, the envelope still a pale triangle on my floor like a failed origami. At 9:20 p.m., I pushed the envelope back into the hall with my foot. Even my refusal was a paper trail. June stretched into July. On July 2nd, Patrice filed for a temporary civil no-contact order, a 50C in North Carolina, using my documentation, the texts, the office attempt, the stakeouts. The judge, a woman with eyebrows like a hawk, granted it ex parte for 10 days pending a hearing. The order prohibited Daniel from contacting me except through counsel, from approaching my home or workplace within 300 feet, and from damaging my property. We served him at 9:14 a.m. On July 3rd, outside the Onsetley office in Charlotte, a process server named Evan texted Patrice a photo of Daniel's surprised face. I printed it and put it in the boring folder. He obeyed. For 2 days. On July 5th, a Saturday, I was at the River Arts District makerspace off Depot Street, cleaning an escapement bridge, when Lucia came in with cups of iced espresso and a face that said, "Prepare." She put her phone on the table. Daniel had created a group chat with a handful of his friends, his mother, and 3 of my acquaintances from the planning board. He wrote a long message about how I had mental health issues, how I was obsessive about watches to a worrying degree, how I'd emptied our account and was punishing him for working hard. Screenshots bloomed across my screen like mold. He knew I'd see it eventually. I did not answer. I sent them to Patrice. She asked my permission to forward to Onsetley's HR with the line, "Your employee is engaging in harassment and defamation in violation of a court order." I said yes, she did. On July 7th, I received a formal email from Onsetley titled Notice of Administrative Leave. It said Daniel was suspended pending investigation. On July 9th, at the 50C hearing, he showed up in a navy suit, one shade too braggy, and a tie with tiny sailboats. His lawyer argued that the envelope $6,750 in a cashier's check proved good faith. Patrice, as if flipping a movement, turned each piece. The check is not a cure. The misrepresentations are documented. The stalking is documented. The defamation is documented. The judge extended the no-contact order for 1 year. When Daniel stepped out, he looked at me, and for the first time since this began, the face he wore was something I wasn't sure I'd ever seen. Small. The day after the hearing, I changed the locks. Top-notch locksmith, invoice TN7742, 162, deadbolt model Schlug B60N619, installed a Nest camera above the door, serial A3C29S4, and registered for USPS informed delivery, so I'd know if he stole mail. I moved to a different gym. I told the front desk at the old one to remove me from the shared guest list the staff sometimes intel swapped in a group chat titled Sweatfam. They said, of course, and I believed them because the manager wrote himself a post-it. I wish the story ended there. It didn't. On July 14th at 11:56 p.m., my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. He had found a way to cheat the spirit of the order. He had asked his father to call me. The message was an annoyed man with a Bremen C consonants. "You are ruining my son. Please call me." I reported it to Patrice. She shrugged and said, "Dad's not in the order unless he behaves in a way that makes him belong." I blocked the number anyway. On July 18th, a woman named Erin Jansen DM'd me on Instagram from EJ Sunrise. Her profile picture was a sun over water. "We should talk," she wrote. "I didn't know he was engaged, I swear." Her messages were careful, not a confession so much as a surrender. She was 29, a photographer from Miami whose work was a diet of pool water and oranges. He'd told her his engagement had gone stale and he was about to end it, the way you'd explain changing an oil filter. He'd said we were basically roommates. He'd told her he was looking at jobs in Florida. She sent me a photo of his face from across a table and a line that read, "He said he loved how I didn't ask for anything." She sent a photo of the cashier's check he'd given her on June 10th for a deposit. The memo said, "Sunrise Creative Wedding Content." She wrote, "I'm returning it. I sent it to his office, certified mail today." She attached the USPS receipt, 7219 so 700 0002 2095 4103. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because he told me you were crazy," she wrote. "But you make parks." I thanked her. I did not forgive her, but I believed her. We are all someone's second-hand skipping. I sent the screenshots to Patrice. She said, "This will help if he tries to reframe." Documentation is a story that doesn't get bored of being true. On July 22nd at 8:03 p.m., my Nest camera caught Daniel pacing in the hallway. He held his phone under his jaw like a microphone. He knocked with his knuckles once, twice. The order said he couldn't be within 300 feet of my door. He was at 3. I called the non-emergency line. An officer named Pryor came, recognized him from the photo on the security sheet, and told him to leave. He did, but slowly, like someone dragging a bag of expectations. The positive turn wasn't dramatic. It arrived as the kindest boring thing. Work that was still mine. On July 24th, I presented to the planning board our draft for the Riverfront Greenway extension. A man from the university sat in the second row, nodding the way a watch ticks, steady, unforced. After the meeting, he introduced himself. Oliver Hart, 36, British-Swiss, professor in urban design who used to apprentice in a watch repair shop in Geneva when he was a teenager. I laughed. He smiled the patient smile of someone pleased by a small coincidence. He complimented the traffic modeling. He asked, "How'd you get the turning radius right on those right-angle corners?" I said, "Because I biked it." He asked about the ETA 1080. I told him it finally behaved. He invited me to a guest lecture he'd give on August 3rd. Streets as Clocks, the Rhythm of Cities. We had coffee after the lecture at High Five on Rankin Avenue. He listened when I said I like cities best, when their shadows on the sidewalks tell time. He told me about Geneva's rippling reflections on the lake and his mother's ceramic studio in Basel. He touched nothing he wasn't handed. When Lucia texted me a photo of me smiling from across the coffee shop, I didn't flinch. Later, when I told Oliver pieces of what had happened, he didn't say, "Not all men," or "I would never." He said, "When something skips, you take it apart." I let myself like him, not because he was a hero, but because he wasn't trying to be. On August 6th, on-set terminated Daniel. I know because Patrice forwarded the terse HR email addressed to him. Cause termination under Section 7B, misuse of funds, violation of expense policy, reputational harm. There were words about severance, none. There were words about his device, return. There was a note, reminder that non-disparagement is mutual. 2 days later, he texted Lucia from a new number to ask if she could mediate. She replied with a screenshot of the order and the line, "No." She then sent me a photo of her cat making a face that looked exactly like a man losing control of a narrative. August 12th would have been our cake tasting. Instead, I spent the evening at the makerspace with Anya, a Hungarian ceramicist who rarely spoke above a murmur. We shared a table, her cups, aligned like a choir, my watch bridges gleaming like fish scales. She told me about the Danube. I told her about the river here. She said, "When the glaze crawls, it's not failing. It's telling you the clay and the glass need something between." We talked about layers, slip, underglaze, clear. She didn't ask what he did. She looked at my hands and said, "You're good at tiny bravery." On August 18th, I got a letter from Blue Ridge Bank. Account closure confirmed. The wedding fund was dissolved by mutual withdrawal, 22,000 to me, 0 to him. He had tried to block it. He had no standing left. Patrice's demand and the bank's findings had left him with no lever. I moved the money into a CD and wrote in my notebook, "Not for weddings, for time." He tried twice more to re-enter my life sideways. In early September, he sent an apology email to my work address, full of words like clarity and narrative. It flagged it and sandboxed it. I read it anyway from the safety of a window that didn't allow links. He wrote, "I'm getting help." He wrote, "I can repay you with interest." He wrote, "I've always admired your discipline." He wrote, "You're cruel." The pivot halfway through read like a man discovering himself in a mirror and not liking the lighting. I dragged it into a folder labeled Patrice. I returned to the Greenway map and adjusted the turning radius on a curve based on Oliver's feedback. In late September, he tried romance as a weapon. An envelope arrived at my mother's house in Milwaukee addressed to me. A handwritten letter about the blanket on the parkway and how he wants to be the kind of man who can sit still with your patience. He included a Polaroid of us from March, laughing, both younger than our birthdays would suggest. My mother texted, "Do you want me to burn this?" I wrote back, "Please," and she sent me a video of the paper curling in a ceramic bowl on her patio, the edges going orange, then black, then nothing. I watched the way fire consumes images, quickly, like it's embarrassed to be seen doing it. People told me I'd win if I found someone better fast, like recovery is a race you run by, standing next to someone stable. The truth was less glossy than any victory. I won by counting seconds honestly. I won by opening a safe deposit box, by changing a lock, by writing a number on a page, CPD 2025-33784. I won by acknowledging a small stutter in a second hand and not calling it charm. But if you want the cinematic ending, if you need a twist that clicks as neatly as a watch case closing, here it is. 2 months later, on October 12th, the day we would have signed the contract with the foundry. I went anyway, earlier in the afternoon. The courtyard was empty. Stephanie, the events manager, recognized me and asked gently if I wanted to move the hold to something else someday. I said no. I asked if there were any other bookings tonight. "A corporate dinner," she said. "Small, quiet." I nodded. On the way out, I saw a man at the bar wearing a watch I had serviced in July, a Hamilton with a New Balance staff. He glanced at my wrist out of habit. I raised my left hand to show my own watch. He smiled the smile of the initiated. It wasn't Daniel. He was somewhere in Florida. I'd heard through a cousin of a neighbor who saw a LinkedIn update the way you see a leaf in the corner of your eye. He had joined a real estate startup in Miami as VP Growth. Of course he had. I walked home through Pack Square in the early evening light, the benches I'd fought for full of teenagers with skateboards and a man playing a nylon string guitar. At my workbench, I closed the case back on the ETA 1080 and felt the threads take perfectly. The second hand swept, smooth as a stream over small stones. I wrote the date on a card, 11225, regulation Plosh 4 stay. I put the watch in a velvet pouch and leaned back. He once told me I was lucky to have him because he taught me how the world works. He said he could buy time the way other men buy suits. He said I shouldn't pick at details. I should trust the big picture. Erin had messaged me months ago. He said he could forget me in a week. He thought forgetting was something he did to people instead of something people did to him. I counted seconds on a watch I repaired while he counted on me not noticing. When the second hand skipped, I finally saw how much time he'd been stealing. And the twist, he said he'd forget me in a week. But I'm the one who forgot him.